The room was quiet, but the tension was impossible to ignore. After 36 years behind bars, Eric and Lyle Menendez sat waiting for their fate. And then, the gavel came down, not with freedom, not with redemption, but with yet another denial. But this time, the aftermath was different. Their attorney, Mark Geragos, didn't just walk out of that parole hearing with disappointment, he walked out with fury. On TMZ's podcast Two Angry Men, Geragos unleashed one of the most damning accusations against the system we've heard in years. It was obviously rigged. Don't believe me? Talk to any of the family members. The only person in that room who didn't think it was rigged was the DA's office. Strong words. Explosive words. And words that raise a chilling question: if the Menendez brothers' parole hearing really was a sham, what does that say about the American justice system in 2025? Because let's be clear, the Menendez brothers' case isn't just some random old trial. It's one of the most infamous, most dissected, most controversial murder cases in U.S. history. And whether you believe they were cold-blooded killers or abused children pushed to the edge, what happened at this hearing has people talking once again. So today, we're diving deep: the alleged corruption, the history, the decades-long fight for freedom, and why Geragos is claiming the system is terrified of letting the Menendez brothers walk free. The rigged hearing allegations. The parole hearing was supposed to be straightforward. After more than 3 decades in prison, both Eric and Lyle were eligible for review. Family members attended. The district attorney's office showed up. And the parole board, at least on paper, was meant to evaluate the brothers' rehabilitation, their records, their growth. But according to Geragos, none of that actually happened. Instead, he described it as a complete circus, an unprepared, sloppy proceeding that looked more like theater than justice. He claims the board wasn't even ready with the evidence. That their questions were shallow, rehearsed, and dismissive. That the DA's office seemed more focused on optics than facts. And most damning of all, that the parole board fought tooth and nail to keep cameras and the public out of the room. Why? Geragos says it's simple: no one would believe this was happening in the US in 2025. Think about that. The year 2025, in a country that prides itself on transparency and fairness, and yet a high-profile parole hearing was allegedly handled like some backroom deal. If true, that's not just about Eric and Lyle, it's about the integrity of the system itself. And it's no wonder that supporters of the Menendez brothers immediately began echoing his words online. Social media lit up with hashtags like #RiggedHearing and #FreeTheMenendezBrothers, with fans calling it yet another miscarriage of justice. But before we dive deeper into the current battle, we need to rewind, because you can't understand the fury around this parole decision without going back to where it all began. The Menendez brothers' legacy. August 20th, 1989. Beverly Hills. The mansion of Jose and Kitty Menendez. Inside, a crime that would shock the world was about to unfold. That night, Jose Menendez, a powerful entertainment executive, and his wife Kitty were shot to death in their living room. The killers? Their own sons, Lyle and Eric, just 21 and 18 years old at the time. At first, the murders looked like a mafia-style hit. The brutality was staggering. The bodies mutilated by multiple shotgun blasts. Beverly Hills police suspected it was revenge, a business deal gone wrong, or a robbery. No one thought the 2 crying young men who claimed to have found their parents could be the killers. But months later, cracks began to show. Eric confessed to his therapist. The brothers' spending sprees, luxury cars, Rolex watches, expensive vacations, raised eyebrows. And soon, the shocking truth unraveled: the Menendez brothers had killed their parents. The trial that followed was nothing short of a media spectacle. Televised, sensationalized, dissected by every news outlet in America. On one side, prosecutors painted the brothers as spoiled, greedy brats who slaughtered their wealthy parents for inheritance. On the other side, the defense argued something far darker. That Eric and Lyle had endured years of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse at the hands of their father, and finally snapped. It was a story that divided America. Were they cold-blooded killers or abused children fighting for survival? In the end, the jury chose the former. Both were convicted of first-degree murder in 1996 and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But here's the twist: over the years, public opinion started to change. Documentaries, podcasts, and even Netflix's Law and Order, True Crime, the Menendez murders began to explore the abuse claims more seriously. Younger generations on social media, many of whom weren't even alive in 1989, started re-examining the case. And suddenly, Eric and Lyle weren't just seen as killers. To some, they were tragic figures, victims who had been failed by their family and the system. Which brings us back to today, and why their parole hearings have become such a battleground. The parole battle. In 2025, after decades behind bars, the Menendez brothers were finally eligible for parole. To many, this was their shot at redemption. Both men had spotless prison records. They'd taken educational courses. Eric had even helped mentor other inmates. By all accounts, they had transformed themselves. But parole boards don't just look at good behavior. They weigh the original crime. And when that crime is parricide, the murder of your own parents, it's almost impossible to overcome. On August 21st, the parole board met. And after hours of testimony, they came back with their decision: denied. Not just denied, but denied for another 3 years. That means Eric and Lyle won't get another standard parole hearing until 2028. Now, technically, they can file for an administrative review next year, a kind of appeal of the board's decision. But as Geragos himself pointed out, when the process feels rigged from the start, how much faith can you really have in an appeal? For their supporters, this was more than just a setback. It was proof that the system never intended to give the Menendez brothers a fair shot. The lawyer's explosive statements. Mark Geragos didn't hold back. On TMZ's podcast, he practically lit the system on fire with his words. It was unbelievable what show this was for these people to be conducting and to be so ill-prepared. Geragos went further, accusing the board of deliberately hiding the process. He said the secrecy wasn't about privacy, it was about covering up incompetence. And then came the biggest bombshell: his claim that the DA's office was the only group in the room who thought the hearing was legitimate. Everyone else, family members, supporters, even neutral observers, left with the same impression: something was off. Was this corruption? Political pressure? Or simply bias against two of the most infamous inmates in America? That's the question Geragos wants the public to ask. And judging by the online reaction, many already are. Life behind bars. So what have the Menendez brothers been doing all these years in prison? Eric and Lyle were originally placed in different prisons, separated for decades. They didn't even see each other until 2018, when they were finally reunited at Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego. That reunion photo, two middle-aged men hugging in prison uniforms, went viral. Since then, they've reportedly spent their time mentoring other inmates, taking courses, and even engaging in creative projects. Eric has written poetry. Lyle has spoken about his desire to help others avoid the mistakes he made. Both have married while in prison, Eric to Tammy Saccoman in 1999, and Lyle twice, most recently to Rebecca Sneed in 2003. To their supporters, these are signs of rehabilitation, proof that they're not the same young men who committed those horrific crimes. To their critics, none of it erases what they did on that August night in 1989. Why this case still divides America. Here's the thing: the Menendez brothers' case will never stop being controversial. Because at its core, it asks one impossible question: can abuse justify murder? Their defense was groundbreaking at the time, introducing the abuse excuse to mainstream America. But not everyone bought it. Many still see them as entitled Beverly Hills kids who wanted their father's fortune. Others believe they were genuinely terrorized by a controlling, abusive father and a mother who looked the other way. And in 2025, that debate still rages on. Social media has given the brothers a second life. TikTok edits romanticize their story. Documentaries highlight details the prosecution downplayed. And more than 3 decades later, people are still arguing over whether Eric and Lyle are victims or villains. The bigger picture. This isn't just about two brothers. It's about what their case reveals about parole, justice, and public opinion in America. High-profile inmates almost never get parole. Why? Because the system doesn't just judge them, it judges the headlines. Imagine the outrage if Eric and Lyle walked free tomorrow. The tabloids, the talk shows, the political backlash. It's far easier for the parole board to just say no. But if Geragos is right, this wasn't just about fear of headlines. It was about covering up a broken system, one that looks more like theater than justice. 36 years ago, 2 terrified, angry young men walked into their parents' mansion with shotguns. The world has debated ever since whether they were monsters or martyrs. In 2025, they sat before the parole board hoping for a chance at redemption. Instead, their lawyer says they walked into a rigged game. And so the question remains, if justice really was denied in that room, what does that mean for every inmate in America whose fate lies in the hands of a system that may not be as fair as we'd like to believe? Because if Mark Geragos is right, then the Menendez brothers may not just be prisoners of their past, they may be prisoners of a system terrified of admitting it made a mistake. So I'll leave you with this: was the parole board protecting justice, or protecting itself?